Ne fu questa l'unica proposizione contraddittoria che li sentì annunziare, ma anche ora, che sono vecchio e più saggio di allora, non ho definitivamente compreso come egli potesse aver tanta fiducia nel suo amico di Occam e giurare del tempo stesso sulle parole di Bacone, come era solito fare. E, pur vero che quelli erano tempi oscuri in cui un uomo saggio doveva pensare cose in contradicción tra loro. Vale, ahora vamos a leer los mismos párrafos en inglés. In the pages to follow, I shall not indulge in descriptions of persons, except when facial expression or a gesture appears as a sign of a mute but eloquent language. Because, as Boethius says, nothing is more fleeting than external form, which withers and alters like the flowers of the field at the appearance of autumn. And what would be the point of saying today that the Abbot Abo had a stern eye and a pale cheeks, when by now he and those around him are dust, and their bodies have the mortal dryness of dust. Only their souls, God grant, shining with a light that will never be extinguished. But I would like to describe William at least once, because his singular features struck me, and it is characteristic of the young to become bound to an older and wiser man, not only by the spell of his words and the sharpness of his mind, but also by the superficial form of his body, which proves very dear, like the figure of a father whose gestures we study and whose frowns, whose smile we observe, without a shadow of lust to pollute this form, perhaps the only that is truly pure, of corporal love. In the past, men were handsome and great. Now they are children and dwarfs. But this is merely one of the many facts that demonstrate the disaster of an aging world. The young no longer want to study anything. Learning is in decline. The whole world walks on its head. Blind men lead others equally blind and cause them to plunge into the abyss. Birds leave the nest before they can fly. The jackass plays the lyre. Oxen dance. Mary no longer loves the contemplative life, and Martha no longer loves the active life. Leith is sterile. Rachel has a carnal eye. Cato visits brothels. Lucretius becomes a woman. Everything is on the wrong path. In those days, thank God, I acquired from my master the desire to learn and a sense of the straight way, which remains even when the path is tortuous. Brother William's physical appearance was at that time such as to attract the attention of the most in, inattentive observer. His height surpassed that of normal man, and he was so thin that he seemed still taller. His eyes were sharp and penetrating. His thin and slightly beaky nose gave his countenance the expression of a man on the lookout, save in certain moments of of sluggishness, of which I shall speak. His chin also denoted a firm will, though the long face covered with freckles, such as I often saw among those born between Hibernia and Northumbria, could occasionally express hesitation and puzzlement. In time, I realized that what seemed a lack of confidence was only curiosity. But at the beginning, I knew little of this virtue, which I thought rather a passion of the covetous spirit. I believed instead that the rational spirit should not indulge such passion, but feed only on the truth which I thought one knows from the outside. Boy that I was first and most deeply struck by some clumps of yellowish hair that protubered from his ears, and by his thick blond eyebrows. He had perhaps seen 50 springs, and was therefore already very old, but his tireless body moved with an agility I myself always often lacked. His energy seemed inexhaustible when a burst of activity overwhelmed him. But from time to time, as if his vital spirit had something of the crayfish, he moved backward in moments of inertia, and I watched him lie for hours on my pallet in my cell, uttering barely a few monosyllables, without contracting a single muscle of his face. On those occasions, a vacant, absent expression appeared in his eyes, and I would have suspected he was in the power of some vegetal substance capable of producing visions, if the obvious temperance of his life had not led me to reject this thought. I will not deny, however, that in the course of the journey he sometimes stopped at the edge of a meadow at the entrance to a forest to gather some herb, always the same one, I believe, and he would then chew it with an absorbed look. He kept some of it with him and ate it in the moments of greatest tension, and we had a number of them at the abbey. Once, when I asked him what it was, he said, laughing, that a good Christian can sometimes learn also from the infidels. And when I asked him to let me taste it, he replied that herbs that are good for an old Franciscan are not good for a young Benedictine. During our time together, we did not have occasion to lead a very regular life. Even at the Abbey, we remained up at night and collapsed early during the day, nor did we take part regularly in the holy offices. On our journeys, however, he seldom stayed awake, often complained, and his habits were frugal. Sometimes, also at the abbey, he would spend the whole day walking in the vegetable garden, examining the plants as if they were chrysoprase or esmeralds, and I saw him roaming about the treasure crypt, looking at a coffer studded with emeralds and chrysoprases, as if it were a clump of thorn apple. At other times, he would pass an entire day in the great hall of the library, leafing through manuscripts, as if seeking nothing but his own enjoyment, while around us the corpses of monks horribly murdered were multiplying. One day I found him strolling in the flower garden without any apparent aim, as if he did not have to account to God for his work. In my order, they had told me quite a different way of spending my time, and I said to him, and he answered that the beauty of the cosmos derives not only from unity in variety, but also from variety in unity. This seems to me an answer dictated by crude common sense. This seems to me an answer dictated by crude common sense, but I learned subsequently that the men of his land often define things in ways in which it seems that the enlightening power of reason has a scant function. During our period at the Abbey, his hands were always covered with the dust of books, the gold of still fresh illumination, or with yellowish substances he touched in Severinus infirmary. He seemed unable to think save with his hands, an attribute I considered then worthy of a mechanic. But even when his hands touched the most fragile things, such as certain freshly illuminated codices, or, or pages worn by time and friable as unleavened bread, he possessed, it seemed to me, an extraordinarily delicate touch, the same that he used in handling his machines. I will tell, in fact, how this strange man carried with him in his back instruments that I had never seen before then, which he called his wondrous machines. Machines, he said, are an effect of art, which is nature's shape, and they produce not its forms, but the operation itself. He explained to me thus the wonders of the clock, the astrolabe, and the magnet. But at the beginning, I feared it was witchcraft, and I pretended to sleep on certain clear nights when he, with a strange triangle in his hand, stood watching the stars. The Franciscans I had known in Italy and in my own land were simple men, often illiterate, and I expressed to him my amazement at his learning. But he said to me, smiling, that the Franciscans of his land were cast in another mold. Roger Bacon, whom I venerate as my master, teaches that the divine plan will one day encompass the science of machines, which is natural and healthy magic, and one day it will be possible, by exploiting the power of nature, to create instruments of navigation by which ships will proceed unico homine regente and far more rapid than those propelled by sails or oars. And there will be self-propelled wagons and flying apparatuses of such form that a man seated in them, by turning a device, can flap artificial wings, and modum avis volantis, and tiny instruments will lift huge weights, and vehicles will allow travel on the bottom of the sea. When I asked him where these machines were, he told me that they had already been made in ancient times, and some even in our own time, except the flying instrument, which I have never seen or known anyone who has seen. But I know of a learned man who has conceived it, and bridges can be built across rivers without columns or other support, and other unheard of machines are possible, but you must not worry if they do not yet exist, because that does not mean they will not exist later. And I say to you that God wishes them to be, and certainly they already are in His mind, even if my friend from Occam denies that ideas exist in such ways. And I do not say this because we can determine the divine nature, but precisely because we cannot set any limit to it. Nor was this the only contradictory proposition I heard him utter. But even now, when I am old and wiser than I was then, I have not completely understood how he could have such faith in his friend from Occam, and at the same time swear by the words of Bacon, as he was accustomed to doing. It is also true that in those dark times a wise man had to believe things that were in contradiction among themselves.